Hey all, Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters, another weekly look at all things digital business. This is a very, very important strategy call. We've run this now for a long, long time. Reincarnated it back in 2025, and now we're in 2026 all of a sudden. So we are very consistent, we are very persistent, and we will not give up. We understand when you get involved with digital assets, you must work with them. It's all about tokenomics. It's all about making sure that you finish what you start. So on top of that, this is the most valuable information in the world. It's a very good opportunity for people as individuals to fix the money in their own lives and then go and fix the world, or at least help go to fix the world, right? That's what we should be doing. For the past 50 odd years, we've been taking from future generations. This is an opportunity for us to give back to future generations, just like the Victorians did, just like prior generations did. How many buildings in your town or city are as old as the Victorian age that are still standing, yeah, and worth that level of respect? Not very many. So it's a very much the same thing in the digital realm now, early in the 21st century, and our job is to be part of that in our lifetimes. It's not just about knowing the information, though. It's also about making sure you master how to, maintain and manage, which is now much more about project management. We started off as startup investors. We started up as possibly even speculative investors, even as early as a decade ago with Bitcoin. But now it's very much about project management. And that's cascaded into all sorts of different industries, which we've been part of over the past decade at DBM. And we're still here. The Academy is barely 5 or 6 years old. DBM is much older than that in terms of how long we've been doing this type of thing. So we've conjoined all that information into a very, very powerful academy, which is now more or less a support structure, to be honest. It's a project support management system, much more possibly than even an education system, especially with our core people. And all our people know that we're not here to give you any advice. What you do as a grown adult is your business. All I know is what you know. That carrying on trying to do the same thing and expecting a different result is insanity. You do have to diversify and look at different ways to create what it is you're looking for, which in the end is purchasing power. So we combined 3 different facets in order to make that possible. Okay. We've additionally added fixed incomes. Oh, not added, we've re-added actually. We've always been into fixed incomes at DBM, but we went very much into variable income in the era of DeFi back in 2018-19. And we've done our very best to deploy those different activities so that becomes a bigger part of our daily lives. Variable incomes, passive incomes, etc. Not easy. Okay, so we have gone back to bringing some fixed income solutions to people over this past while. And it's a case of now working both those. They're both digital business setups, right? So they both fall under the remit. But it's a case of you deciding which of those you want as you ongoingly manage what it is you've maybe already got involved with as we look for liquidity events. But while we're waiting for those liquidity events, or they're a little bit too variable for what we want, then you've got a duty of care to backstop that with some with some fixed incomes. And that can include your job. That can include what you're doing in your normal life, your normal business. But there are plenty of ways, as we'll talk about in part 2, for you to create fixed incomes in this space alongside what you may already have with variable incomes. On top of all that is the discipline, and it is a discipline of having the fortitude and resilience in your core beliefs around fixed sound money assets. Predominantly Bitcoin as far as we're concerned in the digital era, but also gold, silver, etc., as we've been talking about holistically from DBM's point of view for well over a decade. So if you've been accumulating and getting to 1 Bitcoin, getting to 1 kilogram of gold, as we've been saying for years and years and years, kudos to you. Yeah, because as you're finding right now, especially with gold, for example, just as we enjoyed with Bitcoin only 6 months ago, but we're now seeing it with gold only 6 months later, you're able to take some pretty strong decisions. You've done position leverage. Now you can take some choice and maneuver some of the equity back to your chosen passive variable income streams. Yeah, that's the skill. And we're at that point. We're just coming to that point again now where we're able to redeploy and look to build our profit and loss accounts to a higher level because of equity from our balance sheet that we've accrued over the prior period of time. Yeah, that's fine. Now Bitcoin's gone the other way. Yeah, but Bitcoin will spring back as quick as it's gone. The whole thing is incredibly dynamic and a privilege to be able to work with. All right, so look out for module 7 next month, where we talk much more about the management of profit and loss accounts, the management of balance sheets, the management of cash flow forecasting, setting up your tools so that you can forward project, especially if you've been involved with the digital business industry for up to 5 years. So a bit deeper down into the channels, just to reiterate, really, we work with various different ways to convert actual assets, okay, either built on smart contracts or built on self-sovereignty, in cold storage, in other words, or on these super systems that we work with, where you can actually combine equity and yield in one system. Okay, now this takes a certain type of person. Yeah, it's not for everybody. It's certainly not. We work all the time with people who are capable of maintaining resilience, fortitude, and patience. Unfortunately, that isn't very many people, but it's okay, because as long as we improve the lives of one person today compared to yesterday, then we've done our jobs. So obviously Bitcoin speaks for itself. Even now, where we're at now, that 68% CAGR over 14 years has dropped ever so slightly, possibly down to 50%, but we're about 40% underneath the power law right now. So it'll spring back very quickly, and we are projecting to see between 30 and 50% CAGR between now and 2030 per year. Yeah, you've got to look back and go, right, well, people were telling me about this amazing compound annual growth rate CAGR back in 2015. Why didn't I listen to them? Well, I don't know why you didn't listen to them, but the whole idea is that now that you're aware of how powerful it is, you work into that over this next cycle. And what's been 10 years prior to get to, let's call it 55, 50, 50% CAGR, whatever, the next period of time will be 5 years. And the period after that will be 2.5 years. This is the whole point of it. So if you're ramping up, especially if you're at a time of life where you're looking to get yourself in a position of extended purchasing power on top of whatever else you've built in your life, you really need to be looking at those CAGRs. Not take my word for it, go and do the research for yourselves, but it's very powerful what happens with Bitcoin. Okay, it's very, very powerful. But we don't stop there. We want to make sure that we're also commanding yield in our control. So I said earlier about the variable incomes. So we know how to do that in smart contracts. Talk a lot in part 2 about how important it is to hold your nerve and hold the line when it comes to decisions you've made over the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And similarly, it's the case with altcoin yield. It's a very, very challenging thing indeed. We've been at it now for over 6 years in DeFi, so we know the challenges of combined altcoin yield. But we are working all the time with the second most valuable digital asset on the planet after Bitcoin. There's a reason that we can still say that 3 years in. The whole point of it is that we understand where these things are going, mainly around the phenomenon of stock to flow. But trying to help people through that is proving to be a very interesting journey indeed. Okay, doesn't really matter. You're here to work for yourself, and working together just makes the life easier. That's all, and more fun, I might add. So I know that's a lot to take on board, and I'm very aware it's a lot to take on board. And we've been trying our best, like I say, for well over a decade to help people realize, educate themselves, and then apply. Yeah, but with the emergence of AI, we've figured out that we can, do a lot of the hard yard legwork, which is just repetitive. And imagine a new person coming in, or someone who's curious about, they've only just realized that they need to take control of their own financial futures. The huge amount of human energy that has to go in to starting from scratch with these people and working through the 5 channels, which is mindset, skills, systems, income, wealth. That takes a lot of human equity. So what we've done, we've converted over a decade's worth of primary knowledge and many decades combined knowledge between the coach team that we've built globally over the past decade. And we've distilled it basically into a wealth builder series that allows people to go through in their own time what it takes to go from mindset to wealth. in a digital environment. And that's what this Wealth Builder series is. So we're just literally halfway through it, module 6. Yeah, doesn't matter. Most of it's evergreen. You can start in module 1 whenever you like. You can't just jump to module 6. You've got to do it in sequence. And you work through the process from mindset to where we are today, which is just touching on the income. And then eventually we'll get into the wealth as we go later on into the 12 modules. Okay. So module 7's coming up next month. And module 7 is really where it hits the road. If you've already got established assets, you've got established positions, you've been patient, you've built, you've held with it, you've kept your assets moving. Module 7 is very important indeed, because it'll teach you how to cash flow forecast, and it'll teach you how to set up your profit and loss accounts to feed perpetually a balance sheet that then feeds perpetually back, all things being equal, equity into your flywheel. Okay, so make sure that you catch up, keep up, and you'll find this very, very useful if you decide to do that, I'm sure. So into the meat and bones of what we talk about each week here. Again, this slide still has absolute relevance. I'll probably always be presenting this slide because it's been an incredible couple of years. I mean, utterly incredible. We spent many years back here with the idealists, the entrepreneurs, a lot of cowboys, a lot of testing, a lot of, opinions flying all over the place. And we survived. Just this last couple of years, we've come through the other side of this Rubicon, which puts us now in a place of having institutional, government level, big business backing, if you want to call it that. It's basically been a vindication of our efforts since as early as 2014, 2015, whenever you got involved with Bitcoin. So we're here now, but it's opened up a whole new realm. A whole new realm. It's massive tailwinds, but it's proving to be a long downwind sail, which is putting a lot of stress on the boat, on the rigging, on the sails, because we're moving at speeds now that we were not used to prior to 2025. That's okay, as long as you understand how to now manage your new rigging. Yeah, you're not buffeting as much anymore. You're not stalling. You're not having to go into safe harbors, like we have done for the last decade. You do have to now ride this. And it's getting faster and faster and arguably more challenging and more complicated, which is why we do these sessions. So, macro and geopolitical. You've got to combine the two. If you're going to work this close to the money supply, you have to be at this level, even though absolutely most of us don't understand it at the level we wish we could. But in my opinion, you're never going to understand it at the level we wish we could, because there's so much murk and swamp. Think about it. This has been going on since Bretton Woods, arguably since 1913 with the incarnation of the Fed. There's no way at our time in life, in our time of this sequence over 100 years since this whole thing has been set up in terms of the way the fiat system works, that we're going to catch it. It's just not going to happen. So I don't lose any sleep over it anymore. At the end of the day, all you can do, if you think about it logically as a grown adult, is be aware of what has happened in the past, take a bearing on where we are today, and then do your best to create the future. You'll never predict the future, but you can create your own future, obviously. Now, so many people do that by just going into the system, what do they call it? The 9 to 5, the rat race, right? So many people live a whole lifetime just doing that and end up being just quiet about it or moaning down the local. But in the end, it seems to me that most people just relinquish the 2 weeks holiday a year. They'll save up for Christmas and start all over again. And they'll take the 10-year hits and they'll moan and groan. And eventually they become so despondent, they just pull back and they don't even bother voting anymore. Right? And they just go into themselves. Now that's each to their own. In my opinion, it should be the opposite. You should be continually looking to how you can improve what you're about as an individual. That's a big mindset benefit. Your skills give you confidence, and then you're able to deploy in ways that we have never dreamt of in the whole of human history. We live at the most amazing time in human history. The very fact I'm talking to you right now for next to nothing, somewhere in the world. Think about that. Now we can deploy on top of the communications age. This is what's so extraordinary, right? So we talk deeply about macro and we talk deeply about geopolitics as much as we can bear. But at the end of the day, if you convert that into a frame of mind that puts you on the front foot, it's an incredible way to live your life compared to the 9 to 5, compared to the commute, compared to living in a cubicle 10 hours a day, right? So Goldman Sachs, just as a big example of what I'm talking about with regards to adoption in the big institutional levels, they've disclosed 2.36 billion crypto exposure just last week, which is a huge number in the grand scheme of things. They've even broken it down as how much Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple that they own, and Solana. And this puts now crypto at 0.33% of their total asset base. Tiny. But the very fact that they've done it tells you everything you need to know about where we're going. This is the early warning, not even a warning, it's like an early signal. But many of us knew about a decade ago. But now we're getting some level of relinquishment and some level of indication. Similarly, on the higher levels, US dollar looking to potentially drop another 10%. State Street warns the US dollar could potentially fall another 10%. Multi-year lows if the Fed cuts rates more aggressively than the market expects. Now, they have to weaken the dollar. That's the whole point of what's going on with the financial industrial complex. So as long as you're aware of it and you're aware of why they're having to do what they're doing as quick as they're doing it, they're trying to do a controlled landing, by the way, rather than a complete, Zimbabwean, Venezuelan collapse, which obviously they're not going to let happen. But the ironic thing about that is that we're able to front run the weakening of the dollar, and we're also able to front run the fact that they're going to print currency in order to give that a soft landing. And what do you think that does to risk on assets? That's the point. So this is just a visual that we can put onto the lightening up the runway for us. Yeah, when it comes especially to assets like Bitcoin. And you've also got to understand that to know the reasons a lot of the shenanigans go on that make people frightened of assets like gold and Bitcoin because of the price movements is exactly the reasons that they need to control a soft landing. All you've got to do is have the patience to see it through. Yeah, that's the irony here. Now, another big one we're picking up on, and we did pick up on this a number of years ago, is why own the technology? Why bother? Well, the interesting thing now, it's not just about Bitcoin anymore. If you were on the blockchain assets course with me 5 years ago, we were talking about the way that the structures work. You've got the underpinning technology, which is manifest as NVIDIA, and we explained why we own NVIDIA 5 years ago. Look at NVIDIA today. Layered on top of that, you've got infrastructure, and layered on top of that, you've got the hard assets such as Bitcoin. The idea is to own all three layers. Now, enter stage left, just this last couple of years in particular, you've got AI. Now, AI is something that we've got our eyes on very, very squarely at the moment. It's not replacing one specific skill. This is the thing about AI. This is what people who aren't paying attention, who aren't doing what you're doing right now, are going to get caught out on. Right? It's a general substitute for cognitive work. Cognitive work. Creatives have got a chance. But cognitive work, which is 90% of all work that's done by human beings, is not going to leave any convenient gap for people to move into the way that you got when automation of agriculture or automation of manufacturing took place. People could move into office jobs and customer support roles and marketing roles and other such things. AI doesn't leave that gap. So what you've got to do is own the technology. Yeah. So whatever you think you're going to do to retrain, or whatever you think you're going to do to try and help your children to be trained in the first place the way you were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, isn't going to wash. You need to own the underlying technology. Now, Bitcoin manifests that in absolute terms because that is the manifestation of blockchain. A lot of the communications that will happen and transactions that will happen will be on chain, all driven through AI. And NVIDIA et al. put the baseline underneath that. Okay, so there's a very strong logic to what it all represents. And we said it 5 years ago in 2020, and I'll say it now in 2026. You do have to own the technology, otherwise the technology will own you. Period. Okay, so anybody who listened to what we were talking about 5 years ago and held the nerve and carried on dollar cost averaging and held stock in Nvidia, etc., has done very, very well. The next 5 years, it won't even be 5 years, it's probably going to be 2 years. And we've got a lot of that lined up already. So we already now start to understand how we're going to own AI and create AI. We're going to be part of the creation element of AI. And I don't just mean teaching AI. So there's a lot going on there. And I'll explain that further into the Wealth Builder series later into 2026. Kathy Wood just said that Bitcoin is a hedge against both inflation and deflation. That's related to what we're talking about. Okay. So all this can come as a productivity shock. The very fact that we're still in 2026 discussing inflation as an issue, all things withstanding with COVID shocks and any other shock that we've been experiencing in our lifetimes, the very fact we're still talking about, laddered inflation just shows you how corrupt the system is in terms of how far gone the baby boomers and the Gen Xers have let the system go out of control since 1971. Think of all the technologies that have come forward in your lifetime that are deflationary, and then 100x that when it comes to what we see with AI over the next couple of years. So deflationary is the conversation point, and that again just makes risk on rare assets more valuable, obviously, right? So the whole idea is that it's a win-win as long as we're able to hold the line. Grandad UK, maybe not Grandad UK, maybe Old Uncle UK compared to Grandad Europe. Old Uncle UK, fair play. They just put blockchain.com onto their FCA crypto approved register. Obviously, the likes of blockchain.com and Ripple have to placate. So don't be under any illusions. Yeah, these three-letter institutions will do whatever they have to do to have this at least perception that they're in control. Right? They're not. They're reacting, especially in the UK and Europe. And it'll be especially the case once the Clarity Act is passed in the US. And the Clarity Act is just a placation. The real engine is coming from the technology itself, which is why we invest in it, right? So the whole idea is that at least the UK are waking up to this type of thing. So we've got to, give credit where credit's due at that level. They haven't got an entrepreneurial bone in their body anymore in the UK, neither in Europe, not like they did 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So, we're still on the back foot, but does it matter in a day and age where we can communicate individually one-to-one for the cost of a broadband? Probably not. What does matter is that we need to be the people making the change, not the politicians, as most people have expected since after the Second World War, right? You've got to keep the entrepreneurs, you've got to keep the business owners at the forefront of your personal tracking, not just waiting for some government to hopefully solve your problems, which is what 90% of the populations tend to do these days by definition of increased public sector jobs. So this whole dynamic is related to macro, but it has big political consequences, and we'll see where we go because popularism is a thing right now. French news again, fair play to the French. Despite their headless government, you're getting news items now through French TV. This last week they've said the currency is completely losing value. That's the euro they're talking about there, and the future is Bitcoin. So you might as well accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. The interest of the United States of America is undoubtedly to devalue the dollar. This is coming through mainstream media in French TV. Hidden in plain sight, I think they call it. 60 billion Coinbase just released the new AI wallet, not AI again, that's letting agents spend, earn and trade on Bitcoin. AI agents, that's just an absolute example of what I'm talking about. Own the technology, otherwise it will own you. Update, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 360, BIP 360, been added to the official code just last week, which is good. The proposal aims to strengthen Bitcoin's defenses against potential quantum computer threats. Again, if you've been at this space long enough, you'll know whatever the FUD, which is predominantly led by people who have never taken the time to learn about this technology, least of all are looking to protect self-interest, then you'll always find the technology improves to compensate for the FUD. This has happened at least 6 or 7 or 8 times, over the years, all the way from Mt. Gox. So, when you're aware at that level, you don't need to be knocked to pieces with FUD around the place, especially in this era of social media. All right, but neither also do you need to be so blindly biased that you don't think about it. Of course, but don't be frightened off by it, guys. It's something that's normal in this space. Last but not least, geopolitics. I've touched on a few things already, but at the end of the day, it's one big game. It's a show. It's a theatre, and as long as you know that, it's okay. Back in the day, maybe before 2008, it was difficult for us to be so blasé with regards to politics, let alone geopolitics, because it felt like it was the only thing that we could have an effect on in a vote, or wearing a yellow vest, or protesting or striking. It felt like the only thing you could do was remove your human labour or human support. That's no longer the case. In fact, quite the opposite. You're able as a human being, if you care to take the realization and education process that we talk about DBM, you're actually able to get ahead of these people. Right? And that is the game. That's the play. We can connect ourselves to a globally interfaced balance sheet, just in the form of Bitcoin, and always be ahead. Always be ahead. And then all you have to do is observe the theatre just as you would if you were sat in a theatre with a bucket of popcorn. It's no longer a case of feeling like you've got yourself with a ring in your nose, waiting for these people to change the world, because they're not going to change it. Just look at what's been going on in Munich this past week. They're not going to change it. They're just going to go around the same old, pushing people to the edges until they fall out with each other enough to justify the next war. And it won't necessarily be a physical war. It'll be trade war, monetary war. This has already been going on, right? And it's having consequences as people just don't know which way to look when it comes to cost of living or cost of lighting their own home up, heating and eating and everything else. So the only way out of it is to take control of your own household. So we can see the games that go on. I mean, look at Trump there, right? Not daft, he's a businessman, right? There's no rules or regulations around him not being able to do what he does, even in a position that he's in today. But look where the trend's going. Whenever you think of him, you just look at the trend. That's all you need to know. Because one thing is, obviously, he's not stupid. Yeah? And he knows how to play the game. Clarity Act is part of that, right? The US is a bit hamstrung at the minute because they know they need to weaken the dollar. They know they've got challenges with out of control. I mean, it goes to $40 trillion, something crazy like that, in the not too distant future, their total debt. So they know they need to do something, and they need management around that, which is why they need clarity, regulation, and everything else. Now, that just falls into the hands of what we've been doing for the past decade to a point. Does it really matter for people our size that they're putting in major acts to manage the way that stable coins will operate alongside hegemonic banking systems? Not really. Not really, because the thing has such a ripple effect onto all other assets associated with that particular step. Our job is to have enough of those assets to ride the waves up and up and up and up and up, because you don't actually need that much as a human being, as an individual. That's why we always say just own one Bitcoin, right? The whole idea is you are aware of the ripple effects and you move through accordingly, especially if you've got line of sight onto liquidity events that you've been building over the past 5 years or so. Denmark's Danske Bank, again, the banks are doing what they need to do in order to, can't beat them, join them, right? So there's a lot of that going on. That'll echo onto governments then who need to bring in the regulations and everything else. They'll do that for selfish reasons. They'll do that under banking lobbies. The banks will take their lion's cut. There's just no getting around it. They're just too big, okay? So the whole idea is you just ride up enough of what you need in that epoch, which is what we're now going into up to 2030. The UK again, yeah, it's trying to catch up. The London will catch up. London's got nothing to do with the UK, by the way. I'm talking about the central London. They will catch up. So doing manoeuvres like they've done here with HSBC's Orion gilt instrument on HSBC's blockchain is just them trying to, put a gravity field around them, hoovering up anything that gets suggested around the tokenization effect that's coming and is already here in many ways, has been since 2018. So government bonds being tokenized is a massive part of that. This could make the UK the first G7 country to issue sovereign bonds on the blockchain. When governments move gilts on chain, blockchain stops becoming a speculative toy to becoming a financial infrastructure instrument. Yeah, just as I've been talking about. When the pipes exist in that realm, though, eventually capital flows. So what you've got to do is own the core. Own the core. And until they come up with something better than Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the core. No shadow of a doubt. It's the best thing humans have come up with so far to represent human energy manifest in a globally connected balance sheet, which has never been done before in human history. So that's how lucky we are. Short-termism through administration, not business people, strikes again. So this is going just back a stepwards. We've given some plaudits to the UK. We've given some plaudits to Denmark and Norway, and I think Hungary and Poland and such countries in the European realm are deserved of some plaudits as they start to take some control here. Then you look at what the Netherlands did last week, and you just know that they're completely infected by short-term bureaucracy who's looking for quick, short-term tax revenues to solve problems that were created by them in the first place. So good luck, the Netherlands. Good luck. On the other side, US Treasury Secretary Bessent said live on CNBC that Bitcoin's price will recover as soon as the crypto bill passes. We need that bill to pass. Now, he's saying that obviously out of hubris. He totally understands that he has a political game to play there because he's not just a Treasury Secretary, obviously. So he knows that he needs to manage this controlled landing. The difference is we can see the landing strip just as much as he can, which has never been done before in human history. Don't forget that. And then the stock market smashing records in dollars because the US keep printing money, or most of the point currency, and that's stealing people's purchasing power through inflation. Yeah, obviously, we've known that for decades. Measured in the asset that the US can't print, such as Bitcoin and gold, the stock markets are getting absolutely crushed. So go and have a word with your financial advisor and ask him where he's advising you to put your future. Has he ever taken the time, or she ever taken the time to even look at that phenomenon over the past 10 years with Bitcoin and past 25 years with gold? Do they even understand what you're talking about when you ask the question? Of course they don't. They're not paid to understand, they're paid to get a commission. All right, so that's where we're at with this week's overview, all things geopolitics and strategy when it comes to macro. Clearly, it's not just a case of listening every week and just saying, oh, that was interesting. It's a case of saying, right, how do I deploy? I've made the realization. How do I now get some education to put in the application? Well, that's the purpose of DBM Academy in its purest form as we sit today. All right, get involved with any level you want. Obviously, the most successful people are up here at the income level, and very succinctly, they're able to move themselves into the wealth level as soon as they feel comfortable with that. And that mainly is incarnated through whatever their profit and loss account is telling them they can afford, right? It's a process. Your job is to get to the wealth level because once you're at wealth, you're managing income. But I'm very aware that the average retail person coming through this realization process is barely getting into the skills sections yet, right? They may have dabbled in a few systems and tried to get lucky and done a bit of buying success, but you're not going to make it. You have to have the skills, which is why we do the Wealth Builder series, especially Module 7, when it comes to pushing your comfort zones in managing cash flow forecasts and P&Ls and everything else. You've got to have the skills to run a business. Otherwise, don't bother. Go and get a job. Hopefully that was useful. We'll see you on the next call.